When my ex-husband's new wife cornered me at my daughter's school play, calling me a deadbeat mom in front of everyone, I felt my world crumble, but what she didn't know was that I had been quietly building something that would change everything. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds all the power. You know that moment when your entire world shifts, and you realize that sometimes the people who try to break you end up being the ones who make you stronger. I'm Delilah, and 3 months ago, I thought my life was falling apart. My ex-husband Brennan had moved on so fast it made my head spin, marrying this Instagram perfect woman named Vera, who seemed to have everything I didn't: money, confidence, and worst of all, my daughter's admiration. If you've ever felt like you're drowning, while everyone else seems to be floating effortlessly, hit that like button right now. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this story ends. The divorce papers were barely dry when Brennan introduced the girls to their new stepmom. Vera was 29, 5 years younger than me, with this glossy blonde hair that never seemed out of place, and a wardrobe that cost more than I made in 6 months. She had this way of smiling that looked genuine. Until you really looked at her eyes, then you'd see something calculating, something cold. I was working 2 jobs, just to keep our heads above water. Morning shifts at Corner Cafe, slinging coffee for commuters who barely looked at me. Then evening tutoring sessions with high school kids who reminded me of dreams I'd put on hold. The apartment we moved into after the divorce was small, cramped, nothing like the spacious house where Sage and River used to run around freely. My twin daughters, 8 years old, were trying so hard to be brave, but I could see the confusion in their eyes every time they came back from their dad's place. Vera had this talent for making everything I did seem inadequate without ever saying it directly. She'd post pictures on social media of the girls in designer outfits, with captions like "so grateful to give these angels everything they deserve." She'd volunteer for every school event, showing up with perfectly curated gift baskets and homemade organic snacks that probably took hours to prepare. Meanwhile, I was sending store-bought cookies and hoping nobody noticed. They came from the discount rack. The other parents started treating me differently. Not openly rude, but there were whispers, sideways glances, the kind of social exclusion that cuts deeper than any harsh words. I'd overhear fragments of conversations about the divorce settlement, about how Brennan traded up, about how maybe the girls were better off with someone who could provide properly for them. But here's what none of them knew, what even Vera, with all her social media stalking, couldn't figure out. Every night after the girls went to sleep, after I finished grading papers and planning the next day's lessons, I was working on something else, something that was going to change everything. I'd always loved writing, always had these stories bouncing around in my head. During those long quiet nights in our tiny apartment, I started putting them down on paper. Children's books about brave little girls who faced big challenges. Stories about single mothers who turned their struggles into superpowers. I was building something, creating something that was entirely mine. The financial struggles weren't just because I was barely making ends meet. Every spare dollar, every tip from the cafe, every extra tutoring session was getting funneled into this dream that nobody else could see. I was investing in myself in ways that didn't show up on Instagram or at school fundraisers. My daughters would sometimes find me at the kitchen table, surrounded by notebooks and my old laptop, and they'd ask what I was working on. I'd tell them it was a surprise, that Mommy was building something special. They'd hug me tight and tell me they loved me. And in those moments, I knew that what we were building together was worth more than anything Vera could buy. What I didn't know was that in just a few weeks, everything was about to explode. The humiliation started small, like paper cuts that don't seem like much until you realize you're bleeding everywhere. Vera had this way of making her generosity feel like a slap in the face. She'd show up to pick up the girls wearing an outfit that cost more than my monthly rent, carrying shopping bags filled with clothes that made everything in their closet look shabby. "I just thought they needed some nice things for school," she'd say with that smile that never reached her eyes. Growing girls, you know how it is. But what she was really saying was clear to both of us. You can't provide for them, I can. The school events became a special kind of torture. Parent-teacher conferences where Vera would swoop in with her leather portfolio and color-coordinated notes, asking detailed questions about enrichment programs. I couldn't afford school fundraisers, where she'd write checks that made other parents nod approvingly, while I counted quarters for the bake sale. Every time, I'd catch glimpses of other mothers whispering, their eyes flicking between Vera's designer handbag and my thrift store cardigan. But the worst part was watching my daughters' faces light up when they saw her. Sage would run to show Vera her artwork, and River would beg her to braid her hair, the fancy way I'd stand there smiling, pretending my heart wasn't breaking, pretending I didn't notice how their excitement dimmed just a little when they turned back to me. The talent show announcement felt like the universe, giving me one chance to be the mom I desperately wanted to be for weeks. Sage and River practiced their dance routine in our tiny living room, bumping into furniture, giggling as they tried to stay in sync. They were so excited, so proud of what they'd created together. I saved every tip, every spare dollar for months, hunting clearance racks and discount stores until I found the perfect matching outfits. Sparkly purple tutus that made them spin like little galaxies. Headbands with silver stars that caught the light. When I showed them those outfits, their faces exploded with joy. "Mommy, we are going to look like real dancers," River squealed, hugging the tutu to her chest. For the first time in months, I felt like I was winning. The night of the talent show, I was running late from the cafe. My manager had kept me over to help with inventory, and I raced to the school with my heart pounding, praying I hadn't missed their performance. I slipped into the back of the auditorium just as they announced my daughters' names. They were beautiful up there, my little stars spinning and laughing, and absolutely glowing with confidence. The audience loved them, parents clapping and cheering. And I felt tears streaming down my face because finally, I had given them something perfect. That's when I saw Vera backstage, surrounded by 3 other girls in professional-grade costumes that looked like they'd stepped out of a Broadway show. Sequined leotards, custom-made tutus with layers of silk and crystals. Makeup done by what was clearly a professional artist. The girls looked stunning, like tiny celebrities, and suddenly, my daughters' costumes looked exactly like what they were, cheap homemade. Not enough Sage and River saw them too. I watched their faces change, watched that bright confidence dim as they looked down at their own outfits. River tugged at her tutu self-consciously, and Sage's smile faltered just a little. "Next time we should get costumes like those," River whispered to her sister, not knowing I could hear, and that's when I knew that Vera wasn't just competing with me for my ex-husband or the other parents' approval. She was competing for my daughter's love, and she was winning. What happened after the show would change everything. The moment that shattered me also became the moment that set me free. After the talent show, parents were milling around the hallway, congratulating their kids, taking photos. I was helping Sage adjust her headband, when I heard Vera's voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "Delilah, can I have a word?" She didn't wait for an answer. She positioned herself right in the middle of the crowd, her voice carrying just loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm concerned about the girls," she said, her tone dripping with fake concern. "Maybe if you spent less time feeling sorry for yourself and more time actually providing for your daughters, they wouldn't have to feel embarrassed about looking like they shopped at a garage sale." The hallway went silent. Phone cameras discreetly turned our way. I felt my daughters press closer to my sides, their small hands gripping my arms. Sage started crying quietly, and River's face went bright red with shame. "You call yourself a mother?" Vera continued, her voice getting stronger, more confident as she realized she had an audience. "But what kind of mother sends her children out looking like that? They deserve better than a deadbeat mom who can't even dress them properly. Thank God they have someone in their lives who actually cares about their well-being." Every parent in that hallway was staring. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed almost hungry for the drama. I felt my daughters shrinking against me, felt their world tilting on its axis as they watched their mother being torn apart in public, and in that moment, something inside me went completely still. Not broken still. "You're absolutely right, Vera," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. "They do deserve better." What she didn't know, what nobody in that hallway knew, was that 3 hours before the talent show, I had received a phone call that changed everything. My editor at Silverbrook Publishing had just offered me a 6-figure advance for my children's book series, The Brave Little Lioness, the same books I'd been writing in secret, pouring my heart and struggle into every page, while everyone assumed I was just barely surviving. For 18 months, I had been building something extraordinary in the shadows while Vera was buying designer clothes and posting perfect family photos. I was creating stories that would touch millions of children's hearts. While she was playing the role of the perfect stepmother, I was actually becoming the mother my daughters needed to see strong, resilient, unstoppable. The first book had already gone viral online, with parents sharing excerpts about single mothers who turned their pain into power. 3 major film studios were in a bidding war for the movie rights. I had speaking engagements lined up at schools across the country, a book tour that would take us to places my daughters had only dreamed of visiting. But the most beautiful part wasn't the money or the fame, it was the message. I had unknowingly been teaching my girls all along that your worth isn't measured by what you can buy or how perfect you look on the outside. It's measured by how you rise when life tries to knock you down. The annual school fundraiser gala was just 3 weeks away, and this year they had invited me as their keynote speaker. The irony was delicious. The same people who had whispered about my failures would be sitting in that audience, listening to my story of triumph. Vera had no idea that her moment of public humiliation had just sealed her own fate. The woman she had just called a deadbeat was about to become the most successful person in that room. Sometimes the quietest revolution is the most powerful one. The night of the school fundraiser gala, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror in a dress that cost more than I used to make in 2 months, not because I wanted to show off, but because I had learned something important about armor. Sometimes you need the outside to match the strength you've been building on the inside. Sage and River sat on my bed, watching me get ready with wide eyes. They knew something big was happening tonight, but they didn't know exactly what. All they knew was that their mother had been glowing differently, lately, walking taller, smiling more freely. "Mommy, you look like a princess," River whispered. And my heart swelled because I finally felt like one. The gala was held at the Grand Ballroom downtown, the kind of place I used to drive past and wonder what it would feel like to belong there. Now I knew it felt like coming home to yourself. I arrived fashionably late, and I could feel the shift in energy as I walked through the doors. Heads turned, whispers started. But this time, they weren't about my discount store clothes or my financial struggles. They were about the woman who had quietly become the most talked about author in children's literature. Vera was there, of course, holding court at a table near the front, her laugh a little too loud, her smile a little too bright. She was wearing a stunning emerald gown, probably custom made every inch, the successful stepmother she'd always presented herself to be. But when our eyes met across the room, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. The evening's program began, and I watched from the wings as the principal introduced the guest speaker. "Tonight we are honored to have with us a parent from our own school community, someone who has inspired children and adults alike with her message of resilience and hope. Please welcome New York Times best-selling author, Delilah Morrison." The applause was thunderous. But what I remember most was the absolute silence at Vera's table. I walked to the podium feeling like I was floating, like every late night, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt had led to this exact instant. 3 months ago I began, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. Someone told me in front of my children that I wasn't good enough, that I was failing them, that they deserved better than what I could provide. I found Vera in the audience, her face pale, her hands gripping her champagne glass like a lifeline. She was absolutely right, I continued, and the room held its breath. They did deserve better. They deserved to see their mother refuse to stay down when life knocked her over. They deserved to see what happens when you turn your pain into purpose, your struggle into strength. I talked about the book series, about the message I wanted every child to hear, that your circumstances don't define your worth, That your parents' love isn't measured in designer clothes or perfect birthday parties, but in the example they set when they think nobody's watching. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. But the real victory came later, when Sage and River ran up to me, their faces shining with pride. Mommy, Sage said, hugging me tight, I always knew you were magic. 6 months later, we moved into our new house, in the best school district in the state. Not to show off, but because my daughters deserved excellent schools, and I could finally provide them. Vera's influence had crumbled like a house of cards. Once people saw her true character, even Brennan realized what he'd lost. But that ship had sailed. The most beautiful part wasn't the success or the money. It was watching my daughters understand that dignity comes from within, that strength isn't always loud, and that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one holding all the power. Your current struggle is not your final chapter. Share this if you've ever been counted out but refused to stay down.